A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was / acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this: "Officer, Costco? What is Costco?" "Friend, it's the state I'm from." "Officer, that sounds made up." "Friend, there are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho?" "Officer, I guess not." "Friend, well, I'm from the small state of Costco." The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Reminds me of a family friend of mine, very funny Australian with an absolutely horrendous Bogan accent. Well, late 80s, he's driving through Texas and runs a red light, and is immediately pulled over by a 250-pound Texan police officer with an equally horrendous accent. The way the stories goes, this man is obviously not the brightest chap. So our friend, when asked about running the red light, gets very apologetic and explains that he gets easily confused because in Australia, you know how things are revered down there, red means go and green means stop. The cop actually let this man go with a warning: "I did not know that. Well, in America, red means stop, so don't make this mistake again." Literally sounds like a bit from The Simpsons. Hilarious. That's German for the Bart, the. How do you remember how many underscores are in your name? I don't, and I never want to. Damn, you gotta hope Reddit never logs you out, haha. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and then put it next to the night deposit box at a bank. And hung an out-of-order sign on the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox. Not a policeman here, but I have a nice story from insurance/debt collectors. There was this guy who was already in heaps of debt. Like more than a lifetime's worth of debt. He proceeded to file several police reports for identity theft up to the point that he got protected from financial checkups. It was a temporary measure that were given to repeated identity theft victims. At the same time, he had reported fake income to the IRS for the last couple of years to between 40 to 60 millions depending on the year. So when he applied for credit cards and loans, they were unable to check his financial credit, due to the identity theft protection, but they checked his tax returns which showed he had a massive income. Got his loans and credit cards, emptied them out and left the country. That's a good way to finance emigrating out of a third world country. When I was 18 and going through a tough time, my old co-worker told me to open a line of credit with my dad's SSN, buy a bunch of iPads, sell them fast, and move to Argentina. Not up but Argentine here. Right now, not good. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s, let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it, so what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explains that he just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down high name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off, and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Edit. To all the people asking if I'm Jim, no, I'm not. I knew him well though, we went to school together and he lived a few doors down from me. I had my own group of friends and occasionally when out at the pub, we would bump into him and he'd tell us of his exploits without a care in the world. As far as that bike goes, he proudly told a few people about it, but you know, we don't grass. He crashed the bike a few months later and was injured, but I can't remember how. He was pretty much a career criminal the last time I saw him, and ended up in jail for a while. While many regard him as scum, I always felt bad for him. Both his parents died before he was 12 and he was in and out of care homes for years. Out of his 4 brothers, one was murdered, the other died of an asthma attack, and another committed suicide. He could never hold down a job and also suffered from depression. The bloke had a shit life. It's been more than 25 years since I saw him last and I often wonder how he's doing. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold, my man. I always laugh when somebody names a character and then proceeds to never use the name. Nice catch. I laugh too. I was gonna read back and check because I wasn't paying attention. But then I didn't. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Racecourse. Usually, we just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying, and with it being so close to Liverpool there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them, as they'd be suited, booted, a high-vis waistcoat on and usually carrying a radio. Now there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars in turn and take all the high-denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been round a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up on his own, high-vis on and radio in his hand, does the deal, leaving the usual receipt so we can balance up at the end of the meeting. Bit early I think, but hey ho, I've got plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate?" "We're the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid-fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till before used to work there apparently, so he knew the drill and he'd been watching the guards and knew just when to time it and what order they were going round the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10 before he decided not to push his luck any further and walked away with about 80 grand, we heard later. Just took off the high-vis, dumped that on the radio, and he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. Smile. If they knew he used to work as security, couldn't they find out who he is? And you'd be able to identify him? Shrugs possibly. But TBH, I was so busy at the time all the description I could give was, well, he had a suit and a high-vis on. And I wasn't the only one. Like the guy who did Walmart someone else mentioned, if you look like you know what you're doing then a lot of times you won't be questioned, especially on a massive site like that with hundreds of staff who may not know each other. They may well have caught up with him later. But certainly on the day he walked off the site with the cash. They've done studies. If someone comes in wearing something like a high-vis jacket and hat, your brain will only remember that stuff. There was a guy who used to rob banks wearing a high-vis construction vest and hard hat. The only part people remembered about him was that. No facial features at all. This thief was actually pretty smart to pull this off. Worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched an ex-inmate, homeless, being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and the elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was middle of January. He didn't want to get too cold. Edit, to the people talking about can't break car windows. That's true. Also depends on the car. The patrol car they used was specifically old model. Used more for the perimeter of the jail unless other patrol cars were in the shop. Those windows had been replaced so many times. I'd kiff it's the same material or what. And for the ones asking for news links, come on guys, you really think the news reports small-time things? Those aren't dramatic enough. I could probably find their charges and stuff and share, but I'm not gonna do that to this guy. He was a nice guy. Not a dick. I'm not gonna put him on blast just to prove anything to people for karma or anything along those lines. Not only does he stay warm through the winter, he is also provided with 3 hot meals and a bed. I would do the same if I found myself homeless and jobless. Not 3 hot meals, but 3 meals nonetheless. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories. Finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment. Puts the apartment number, fake lock, welcome rug, etc. Puts an iPhone for sale. The person comes to buy it. He opens the door in a shower robe and says, "Give me 1 second, I'm just gonna count the money," and poof. He's gone from the exit stairs. This seems like exactly the kind of crime a comedian would commit. I mean, it is kind of funny. Well, to everyone but the person who got screwed. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3/4 minutes to call into us, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. Edit. So part of the building was built into a hill, so the hole was on the back side of the building along the grade line, but when you're inside the building it was about 8 feet up, so it was easier for him to leave out a door. Also, the wall section where he broke through was hollow cement block, the portion of the wall below that was poured concrete. I just keep thinking about Sledge from Rainbow Six Siege. Rainbow Six fell on hard times and Sledge turned to a life of crime, breaking into Greg's and stealing anything warm or not nailed down. Not a police officer, but was an RA in college. My university owned all the houses adjacent to campus. These were ran like dorms, with RAs and the same rules, which included a very strict no alcohol policy. It was a privilege to live in the houses, and priority was given to upperclassmen who were more likely to bend that rule because they were of age, and it was harder to police off campus in houses. There was a student who went around knocking on doors saying something like, "I'm an RA and, housing director's name, sent me for health and wellness checks." She'd find their booze, take it, and follow up with how she's doing them a favor by just giving them a warning. She wasn't actually an RA and was just keeping the booze for herself. The only reason she got found out was because she did it to an actual RA. The RA was male, they kept men and women housing separate, and just assumed he didn't know her because of that. It was only later he questioned why they had a female doing wellness checks on male housing. They did an investigation and asked other residents. Incidents dated back previous 2 years. Never found out who it was. Yaras aren't actually allowed to go through our room. They come in, see no fire hazards, they aren't even allowed to open the fridge or any boxes or anything. As long as it isn't out in the open, we're good. Former RA here. You're right, we couldn't sift through your belongings. We had to basically stand in the center of the room and just sweep our eyes around to see if anything was breaking the rules or harming the room. You would be amazed at how many people leave their clearly against the rules stuff right out in the open. Especially since we announced our presence by knocking and clearly stating that we were RAs and by informing everyone a week in advance that we were doing these sweeps. Busted a lot of people making poor mistakes. Honestly, just as many who were in their rooms when we did our sweeps as the people who were out. You'd think if the RA was knocking at your door, you'd at least try to hide something. My university supplied free refrigerators to all the freshmen. Yeah. Found out later that they do that so that they have the right to allow RAs to check it whenever they want because the school owned it. Definitely this guy who ate the bank robbery note right off the hood of the police car when they were emptying his pockets. Although I'm fairly sure he was still convicted. LMAO his face. He's like, no one's looking. It's free real estate. Meal estate. Finally some good fucking food. Same thing as the computer rooms, guys would cut the power to electrical stations, damage the wiring, then hide waiting for the cops to show up. Once the owners of the buildings came, they would shut off the power because of the unsafe wiring that would have to be repaired in the morning. Everyone would leave for the night, then would cut away all the non-powered wiring to get the copper. I hate this shit. Copper is not expensive enough to be worth this fuckery. It's fucking $3 per pound. Even if dirt is only $3 per pound, you can get it for free and still sell it. Copper thieves are fucking scumbags who cause 100x more damage costs than they can ever make from the copper. Colorado Springs had a real problem with this. I'm sure it wasn't the only city, of course, but there was a fucking full-on gold rush for taking copper out of all the traffic and street lights. Taxes ended up getting raised considerably, along with the municipal electrical rates, to help pay for replacement wiring/security. It's not worth it, you're right, it just fucks shit up for others. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular and well-known U.S. retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product to get one of those "I walked in with this" stickers they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product undamaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no. Not without the original receipt. Dang it, and they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras absolutely everywhere. I feel like I would remember what I had and hadn't recently put a sticker on. But perhaps I wouldn't be getting paid enough to worry too much about it. I believe at this time, the large national chain we are talking about was hiring people that just had to remember to smile. They did not have to be very sharp at the door. Or young. There's one guy I recently dealt with who is on parole. I stopped him in my city after he was looking to buy drugs. Usually people come from all over to buy drugs and then leave. I issue him a warning and let him go, as it's pretty common, and he sang like a bird regarding the people he was trying to buy from. Anyway, the next day, I got a call from his parole officer who says he was alerted the guy was pulled over and wanted to verify that it was his guy that I stopped. I'm a little confused at first, but he goes on to say that the day before, he was scheduled to meet with him but he had an excuse and bailed. His excuse was that he was in the hospital. Well, when he spoke with him the following day, he was able to provide documentation that he had entered the hospital day 1 and had left day 2. Well, I had stopped him at 1:15 in the morning, and after looking at the picture, it was 100% him. Turns out the guy had checked in then out of the hospital on day 1, then in and out again on day 2. He then rearranged half the paperwork to make it look like he was in the hospital overnight, which would make my car stop of him appear like I mixed him up with someone else, as well as give him a valid excuse to miss their meeting. Not sure what's gonna happen to that guy, but I thought it was pretty clever. This was in the late 90s, early 00s. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story, and got put on probation for a semester. So he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out, and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150,000, in return for about $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. He should have played the long con. Cash out the $150K, apply to another school with the understanding he would pay cash. Live somewhat frugally so the cash lasts, and use his story from the first school for his thesis to get his master's. But wouldn't they see his transcripts from the place he failed out of? Working in a home improvement store when younger. This guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off to car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Had a guy try that with the big expensive bedding sets at Sears back 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle, and came out carrying the set. He said he wanted to return it. I said I needed a receipt, and when he asked why, I explained, well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves and trying to return it. He got a bit squirrely, looked around kinda panicked and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. Dead lol. Former Sears employee here. Theft was a huge problem at my store. This was right before everyone caught on to Sears going under. I had to cover lawn and garden, tools, and sporting goods, all by myself. We're talking literally an entire half of the building with absolutely no way to see everything going on at one given moment. It was so bad that thieves would take locked items to the register while I was in the middle of my tractor pitch, unlock the items, and walk out the door. They didn't even need to unlock them though, because my store had just fired all of the asset protection team. We didn't meet our sales goals for the year, and B, there were no sensor/alarms to go off when the security devices passed through the door anyway. Firing your assets protection team sounds like a really bad move. I am not a policeman, but there was a guy in the UK that gained notoriety for an audacious plan which sounds like it would be real. Basically, this guy and 2 accomplices went to the supermarket in 3 separate cars as 3 customers. Person 1 and 2 went into the supermarket individually and bought a large quantity of goods, from a memorized list. Person 1 paid for the goods, and says something a bit flirty to the girl working the till. He leaves the supermarket and dumps the trolley next to one of the cars and heads back into the supermarket. Person 3 loads up that trolley into the car and drives away. Person 1 returns to the supermarket, and picks up a packet of razor blades. On the way back to the till, he picks up Person 2's trolley, which has been loaded with identical items to the first trolley and dumped in an aisle. Person 2 has already left the supermarket by then, and Person 1 now has everything he needs to go back to the same till, flirt again with the same lady, explain he forgot the razor blades, and pay for them. If anyone stops him or suspects that he has not paid for the groceries, he has a receipt in his pocket with the correct items, an appropriate time and date, a member of staff that remembers him, and all the evidence is in his favor so he can prove he paid for a massive trolley full of stolen items. All 3 people in the scheme remained separate but wore identical clothes, so even when reviewing the CCTV there would be no point where you see multiple people. The big giveaway to this scam was that the first trolley full of shopping would have been put into carrier bags, so the second trolley would look different, but now the UK charges for carrier bags and assumes you will bring canvas bags and reuse them, so it's completely normal to leave the supermarket with unbagged goods and put the items into the bags that you have in the boot of your car. There's folklore to this story, but I remember thinking it's an impressive criminal mind to come up with that idea. I remember an officer telling me about a B&D alarm he and his team responded to. No one was there to report the alarm, it must have been a security monitoring company that called. When police showed up, everything seemed normal, most lights were off, and there was an employee still working. Explains he was there working late and must have set off an alarm. They almost believed him until he said before saying the name of the company he worked for. After that it was downhill, but with a little more research he would have pretty much gotten away with it. I don't care how long I've been working for a company, I'd probably still say you with my dumbass too. I'll be sure not to loiter around any crime scenes now. Anyone that immediately requests a lawyer, prior to questioning. That's the smartest thing you can do, if you committed a crime, in most scenarios. If you speak with me and confess, you're fucked. If you speak with me and lie, and I can prove it, you're fucked. If you say nothing at all, there's a chance I'm fucked. Always request a lawyer even if you haven't committed a crime, because what you say can still be used against you. Having an attorney present during interrogation is an essential right. So much this. Do not talk to police. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras, thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall, had already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. He did all the hard work pretty well. Guy I went to high school with kept selling this gold necklace under a fake ID to jewelry stores. When he had cash in his hand from the sale, he'd flash a real-looking airsoft gun and demand the necklace back. Worked about twice until the third guy knew what the deal was if someone tried selling this one particular necklace. Shop owner went in the back to reference an appraisal book and just called the cops. Funny part was he got like a year for the robberies, but using the fake gun added 5 years to the sentence. Never rob a bank with a weapon. You'll be out in like a year or less if you get caught. Edit. Tellers are trained to treat all robbers as though they are armed and to comply with their demands and get them out of the bank ASAP. Money is insured. Banks would rather lose a bunch of cash than deal with legal ramifications of an injured or killed employee. If you show up and tell the teller you're robbing them, they will probably give you the money quicker and more calmly than if you stuck a gun or knife in their face quicker.